We want to focus now on the jury in the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse. 20 people, 11 women, 9 men were initially picked from a pool of 179 prospective jurors back on November 1st. 2 ended up being dismissed. One was a middle-aged man who broke the rules when he told a joke to a deputy about the police shooting of Jacob Blake. The other was a woman, and she was dismissed for health reasons. 18 jurors ended up sitting through the entire 2-week trial. But just before the case was handed to the jury, 6 more jurors were dismissed, a standard procedure that allowed Rittenhouse himself to randomly draw names from a metal tumbler. And after 3.5 days and roughly 26 hours of deliberations, a verdict was reached. Tuerkheimer is the principal and litigation consultant at Trial Methods, and he joins us live tonight with a closer look inside the minds of the jury, or at least as close as we can get. Alan, we appreciate your time. It took this jury 26 hours to deliberate. Typically, when a jury takes longer, it is bad news for the defense, but that was not the case in this trial. What do you think had them delayed and stuck?
I think they really wanted to get it right. And most juries, when they start out, they have an initial sense of how things are going to go. So 5 counts, unanimous, yes, that was the end result. But I'm guessing in the beginning, when they started talking about the case, there were a lot of different perspectives. It could have been 6-6, it could have been 7-5. I don't know what it is, but I have a feeling that right when they started talking about it, there were a lot of different viewpoints that were being put forward. And that's what took a while. They wanted to follow the law. They wanted to go over probably a lot of different aspects of the law. Now, keep in mind the law, as we talked about before, is very ambiguous to a lot of jurors. It's complex, and subjective interpretations always play a role in it. So they wanted to get it right. They didn't have, in my mind, a predetermined result that they wanted to and then back into it. They actually wanted to go through the law, go through it very diligently, go through it fully, and then ultimately everybody finally got on board to the verdict that we saw today.
It can be risky to put a defendant on the stand. The defense took that risk in this trial, putting Kyle Rittenhouse in the hot seat. From the jury's standpoint, I would imagine they want to hear from the defendant in this case or any case, right?
Absolutely. They always want to hear from the defendant. And in this case, they pretty much had to put him on with the claim of self-defense. Everybody wanted to hear from Kyle Rittenhouse himself with such a claim of self-defense and the justification. And I think they got what they wanted. Kyle Rittenhouse broke down on the stand. He was emotional, and he said, I had to do it. I had no choice. And the jury bought it. If they didn't buy it, if they thought that he was fabricating or exaggerating or making it up, I don't think we would have seen the verdicts that we saw today. So they embraced his testimony. And in a way, it was a gamble to put him on the stand, but the defense attorney, Mark Richards, said they tested it out, and there were better results during a mock jury exercise when he was actually on the stand. So they used that feedback into their trial strategy, and it paid off.
And the jury is coached. They know they have to remain neutral. They understand the job that they have ahead of them. They are talked to extensively through the system by the judge and by others to understand the responsibility. With that said, though, I had a defense attorney on moments ago, and her thought was that this jury sympathized with Kyle Rittenhouse as a teenager, as a 17, now 18-year-old. They didn't want to send a teenager to prison for the rest of his life. How much does that play into it? Or is a jury able to set that aside and sympathize with someone and look at the facts?
If I can answer both, I'd probably say both. Usually jurors are able to compartmentalize, and really, this jury seemed to focus on the law and just the fact that they didn't ask the judge. They didn't come to the judge at any point and say, we're stuck, we can't go any further. I really think they were so carefully scrutinizing the law. But some of that does creep in. Everybody, not just jurors, human beings, when they evaluate something, we're only human. We evaluate things through our own predispositions, through our own beliefs, through biases. And I'm sure that a couple of the jurors, maybe more than that, were thinking to themselves, maybe even subconsciously, he was 17 when this happened, he's 18. Are we really going to take action here and condemn him for the rest of his life? So I'm sure it was on the minds of some of the jurors, and maybe more than just a few.
And in all of these cases, somebody is not going to be happy ultimately with the verdict that the jury comes back with. How is the jury supported once they leave the trial, they go back into their normal lives? Does it just end, or is there a support system to help them transition, to handle any of the stress or the turmoil that may follow?
I think for a lot of these jurors, it just feels good to go home and be done with it. It helps to not have to talk about any of this anymore. I'm sure they're going to want to talk to those who they can, because up till today, they weren't allowed to talk about it at all. And certainly they weren't able to talk about it with anybody when they would go home. So I don't know of any formal support groups or anything like that, but I do think that as jurors, after they serve, they usually have a better sense of satisfaction. And I think a lot of these jurors are going to feel like, yes, this was tough. We were tired. A lot went into this, but we did our job. And I think they're going to ultimately feel good about it.
What typically motivates a juror to speak out after they've gone through a trial like this, to share their experience with the public?
I think sometimes if they feel like something needs to be said, maybe they feel like there's been some misrepresentations in the press, or maybe there's something that they just want to set straight. Others just want to talk about it. Some maybe like the limelight a little bit, and maybe they just want to talk about some aspect of the deliberation that nobody would know about unless they talk to a juror. So there are different motivations for jurors talking. And hopefully, I think a lot of us do, that some of these jurors do talk, because the judge at the end seemed to suggest that it was totally fine for them to speak about the case.
Do they have any say as to whether or not their names are published?
That depends on the jurisdiction. I don't think they're going to be published unless they let it be published. I don't think that the media is allowed to if they find their names to disseminate that.
Specifically in this case, Alan, do you believe that this jury will face any sort of backlash in the public because so many were so divided over this case?
I don't think so. I wish I could have been there during voir dire to hear what these jurors said, because if you think about it, like you were saying at the beginning, there were many more, 120, I think it was, and it was whittled down to 20 and then 18. So voir dire was truncated, especially for a big case, but still the parties did know a lot about these jurors. So it would be interesting to know what's going to happen now, and if some are going to feel pressure one way or the other. But that's just part of serving on a jury, and certainly part of serving on a jury in a high-profile case like this. I think because they were deliberated for so long, that they can feel confident that the public and the people in the neighborhood, people in their community, family members, feel like they gave it their all and looked at the evidence. At the end of the day, even though maybe some jurors, and I don't know this happened, but some of the jurors might have felt that Rittenhouse was in the wrong, but the prosecution just didn't uphold their burden and prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
And to your point, real quickly, do you think that the prosecutors will go back and look back at the jury selection process as part of their review of the overall case?
I think it's always helpful to learn where you can do better if you have an outcome that isn't what you anticipated and that you hoped for. So sure, I think they'll look at everything from the beginning of trial all the way up, from the voir dire process to closings. There's always an opportunity to learn.
Were you surprised, Alan, with the verdict today?
I was a little surprised. I thought maybe there would be a partial verdict given the length of time and the fact that they didn't ask the judge or tell the judge that they were hung up on anything. I thought maybe 3-4 of the counts they could be unanimous on, but maybe the fifth one was difficult. So I was a little surprised, but not entirely. They were really diligent going back to the law and asking for it, wanting to be comfortable with it. And so there was a lot of testimony, a lot of video, a lot of things to go over. And so that takes time, especially after a couple of weeks of being bombarded with all this information. Jurors need time to make sense of the world that they just experienced.
And understand the responsibility they have. Alan, appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.